Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Access to Democracy returns. I'm your host, Alan Miller. With us today, a first-time guest. Very pleased to have her, Rabbi Miriam Jerris, who is the rabbi, I would say the chief rabbi for Humanistic Judaism in the United States and Canada, and welcome.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Alan.
Just flew in from Michigan.
I did.
And people will ask several things. Number one, what is Humanistic Judaism? Number two, a woman rabbi. Number three, how did she become a rabbi? So why don't you tackle those in whatever order you wish?
Sure. Well, I have an interesting story about the woman rabbi, because when I was in college, I wrote to Hebrew Union College, which was the Reformed seminary, and I asked for an application to the Rabbinic seminary. And they wrote back and said, we don't admit women into the Rabbinic seminary. And I was so naive that I couldn't believe it. So many years later, I involved myself in Humanistic Judaism. We created our own seminary, and I graduated from the seminary called the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, which is the seminary for humanistic Jewish rabbis. And we accept every gender. The other important thing I think about who we accept is that most of the other seminaries will not accept somebody who is dating or married to someone who is not Jewish and not converted. And we do not have that selection criteria. If you are qualified, you get admitted into our program.
So you wanted to become a rabbi, you became a rabbi.
Right.
Now, people know of Orthodox Judaism, of conservative,
Right.
of Reform, even Reformation, etc. What is Humanistic Judaism?
Well, Humanistic Judaism is an attempt to bring together humanistic values and Jewish culture. We see Judaism as the evolving and historical culture of the Jewish people. Religion is part of that, but it is not all of that. So we claim the entire tradition of the Jewish people as our own. And what we do in Humanistic Judaism is we look at evidence. We realize that there is no evidence for or against a superior being that interferes in our life. So we live our lives as if we are responsible for what happens in our lives. We take that responsibility and we make a difference. We follow the Jewish calendar, but we do it from a human-centered, humanistic perspective.
As opposed to a theistic.
As opposed to a theistic perspective, so that when people say, how do you pray? The answer is, well, there's not an entity that we pray to, so that the things we say when we come together are things that we value. They're the values that we hold dear. They're the things we believe in. And that's really the beauty of Humanistic Judaism, is that we're able to say what we believe and believe what we say.
And I know that there's also a concept that's called tzedakah. And I know that that is very important to humanistic Judaism. Why don't you explain that?
Well, sure. I mean, tzedakah comes from the root word to mean righteous, but it's doing good things. And because we believe that human beings are responsible for making a difference in the world and for helping those less fortunate, it's the things that we do, the compassionate ways that we deal with people less fortunate than ourselves, and it's very much a key value of humanistic Judaism.
I think human beings are doing a lousy job at the moment as you look around the countries that are in strife and where people's rights are really being trampled, and war, killing. It's very depressing. It
is very difficult, and I know a lot. You've got a big picture approach to things. I found that the way I cope with that knowledge is that I know that I can make a difference in people's lives one-on-one, and that's how I cope with that big picture of not being able to manage to fix the world, is that I know that I can make a difference in individuals' lives.
So when and how did humanistic Judaism get its start?
Okay, so in 1963, a Reform rabbi whose name was Sherwin Wine started a congregation in the northern suburbs of Detroit. And it truly was a suburban congregation, the first suburban congregation outside of the city limits of Detroit. And that's how they started. But Rabbi Wine was a philosophy student, and he knew exactly what he wanted to do. And he moved this Reform congregation from a Reform suburban congregation of young couples to a congregation that began to question everything. And they developed a new approach to liturgy, a new liturgy, a way to celebrate holidays, and they did it together. And the Birmingham Temple, which was a suburb of Detroit, and that's why they called the congregation Birmingham Temple, was started in '63. In 1965, the Detroit papers picked up The Atheist Rabbi, and Time magazine picked up a story on the Atheist Rabbi, and then we went national.
And of course, knowing a bit about humanistic Judaism, I think that that's really an unfair designation. One of the things I know about it is that people are free to believe what they want to believe, and it's just that nothing is imposed on you, which seems to me a much more intelligent way to approach religion or non-religion or whatever your beliefs are.
You know, absolutely, and I know that almost every interview for people that aren't familiar with humanistic Judaism starts with, well, isn't humanistic Judaism the home for atheist Jews? And there are, of course, people in humanistic Judaism who would identify as atheists. But there's many who would identify as many other of the theological positions that you can take. And you're exactly right. The whole question is really left out of the equation. You don't need to talk about what you don't believe. We're humanists. We talk about the values that we affirm and the things we do believe in.
So what brings you to Minnesota?
Well, one of my favorite communities ever, Oramet, is the local community and congregation here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I have known the people involved in this congregation since the beginning. And periodically I make a visit, and we have a really wonderful weekend planned that where I'll spend time with the members of the congregation. We'll spend some time tomorrow night. We've got a public event and at the St. Paul Jewish community. And it'll give me an opportunity to spread the word and also to be with the members of the community who don't really get to see people from the national organization that often.
Now, talking about the spread of humanism, and is it fair to say that there are now congregations throughout the United States and Canada?
Yes, we have one in Canada, in Toronto, Ontario. And obviously we're open to starting communities. Mostly the larger metropolitan areas is where there's interest in, I mean, there's interest in smaller areas too, but there's just usually not enough Jews in the smaller areas to create a community for humanistic Judaism.
That's something I was just going to raise. But they don't have to be Jews to be members of Or Emet or to be part of humanistic Judaism.
No, they don't.
And as a matter of fact, I know of my own knowledge that the president of the local congregation, Or Emet, is not Jewish.
Right, right. If people identify or find affinity with the values and ideas of humanistic Judaism, we welcome them. They can identify as humanistic Jews or not. We have a lot of families that are intermarried, interculturally married, interfaith married. One partner may come from a Jewish background, the other partner may not, but feel very comfortable with the humanism piece of it. And we don't have, you know, a standard that you have to convert, or if you identify, self-identify with what's happening in the community, you are welcome to be a part of it.
So what's the difference between humanistic Judaism and Unitarianism?
Well, Unitarianism is a broad-scale approach that kind of takes in all ideas, beliefs, religions, whereas humanistic Judaism is focused on Jewish culture and also on humanism. Not all Unitarians are humanists. So in Unitarianism, you get a much broader approach to things, where in humanistic Judaism, I mean, the approach is Judaism. It is Jewish culture.
I know you have a regular publication, and we brought in a copy if they want to do a close-up on it from the control room or the cameras. This comes out how often and who contributes?
Well, it comes out a couple of times a year. We usually look for contributions from members, so some of the leadership writes, but also individuals in our communities write as well. It depends on what the topic is. The next topic after this one, which is food and Jewish culture, is 50 years of humanistic Judaism. So most of the writers will be people that have been involved for a length of time. And it's topical, but it's also, it's a very good study group resource as well. And if you want to kind of hit the intellectual end of humanistic Judaism, I think that the journal is a good example of just what the current thinking is on a variety of topics.
What have you seen in terms of the growth of the local organization, Or Emet, which I think is about 20 or 25 years old?
Right. Or Emet has done a really wonderful job. The last 5 to 7 years, it's been one of our star communities. And there's been a steady increase or stability, which is unique, really, in the movement right now. We only have a few congregations that are building. And what I noticed the last time I was here was there's a different feel when you come into Or Emet now. There's a warmth, there's a feeling of being welcome. And I think that sense of welcoming people into the community has really solidified the growth here. And we know from the Pew study and just from our own knowledge that many, many Jews believe the same kinds of things that humanistic Jews believe. But a lot of Jews are very comfortable attending a Jewish community once or twice a year, and they're happy with it. So it's the more unusual person, I think, that looks for a local community, that wants to get together on a couple of times a month to study or to celebrate together, and during that time to say things that strike a chord of truth that really has relevant contemporary meaning for people today.
So would anybody be welcome to join a congregation of Humanistic Judaism?
Absolutely.